Computer. Okay. So Parshas Vayechi. I want to talk about one aspect of this parsha, the final parsha of the story of the Avos. We move from Vayechi to Shmos is really the story of a family to a nation. So this is the final parsha in Sefer Bereshis. I want to speak about the um, the story of the bracha with Ephraim and Menashe. So let's just set the set the stage. Yaakov, this is Yaakov's Parshas Vayechi is Yaakov's final 17 years in Mitzrayim, the years where he finally had tranquility, where he was finally able to be together with his son, all of his sons, where they lived together in harmony. And one of the episodes in this week's Parsha that a lot of commentaries speak about, a lot of strange sort of mystical elements surround this, is the blessing of Ephraim and Menashe. That Yosef is told that Yaakov is sick. He brings in his two children for a bracha. And of course, Menashe is the Bechor. Menashe is the firstborn. So Yosef stands him at Yaakov's right hand, by Yaakov's right side. And Ephraim, who's the second-born son, he stands by Yaakov's left side. And of course, we all know, as the Torah says, Sicheles Yadov, that Yaakov guides his hands, and instead of placing his right hand on the Bechor, he switches his hands, and he places his right hand on Ephraim and his left hand on Menashe, which is strange in and of itself, because Menashe is the Bechor. These are Yosef's children. Yosef knows who they are, and he puts Menashe on the right side. But for whatever reason, which is sort of unexplained in the Torah, other than Yaakov saying, when Yosef protests to this, because here you could imagine Yosef seeing this scene, and Yosef, who suffered because his father showed him favoritism by giving him the Ksonis Pasim, and he feels, Barbanel says, he feels that Yaakov's repeating the same mistake again. And he's showing favoritism to Ephraim by giving Ephraim the right hand when Menashe is the Bechor. And he says, he tells his father, no, that's not the right way. He corrects his father. He says, Menashe gets the right hand. He's the Bechor. And Yaakov responds, Yedaiti b'ni yedaiti. I know, my son, I know. Menashe will be a great nation, but Ephraim will be even greater, and therefore Ephraim gets the right hand. And that's all that's all the Torah explains why Ephraim gets the right hand. And Yaakov Avinu blesses Ephraim. I'm recording. Yaakov Avinu blesses Ephraim and Menashe by saying, "B'cho yivarech Yisrael," that in you, the Jewish people, from this point on, the Jewish people will bless their children, will bless their sons, within your name. Yesimcha Elokimka Ephraim and Menashe. They'll tell their children, Hashem should make you like Ephraim and Menashe. V'kach hava, and that's exactly the bracha that ad hayom hazeh, to this day, we give our children. We give our sons, at least our daughters. We say Yesimcha Elokimka Rivka Rachel v'Leah. But our boys, we bless them, and some people make this bracha every Erev Shabbos. Some people have the minhag to do it every Erev Yom Kippur. Whatever your minhag is, this is the bracha that we bless. And there's lots of different questions on this entire episode. Obviously, this entire episode is steeped in all kinds of symbolism. Menashe and Ephraim, they themselves not only are the two sons of Yosef, but they obviously are symbolic as well of whatever they're symbolic of. We'll discuss. There's different opinions about what they're symbolic of, but all kinds of interesting questions here. Why does Ephraim get the right hand? What does Yaakov mean that Ephraim will be greater? What's fascinating, though, at the end of the possuk, the Kedushas Levi points this out, is that at the end where it says Yisrael, that they're going to bless you and they're going to say, Yisimcha Elokimka Ephraim and Menashe. And the possuk ends, V'yasim Ephraim Lifnei Menashe. And Yaakov in the blessing placed Ephraim before Menashe. Why does the possuk have to tell us that? That's obvious. He placed Ephraim before Menashe. We just read it. Yisimcha Elokimka Ephraim and Menashe, and he V'yasim Ephraim Lifnei Menashe. And Yaakov placed Ephraim before Menashe. That's how the possuk ends. It's telling us the obvious, which the Torah never does. So that's another question. We have lots of questions surrounding this. I want to share with you. And the most obvious question, the most, the question that stands out the most is, why is it that we bless our children like Ephraim and Menashe? Why don't we bless our sons like we bless our daughters? Our daughters we bless with the imais. Yisimech Elokim kaser Rivka Rachel v'Leah. So seemingly we should bless our sons. Yisimech Elokim ka'Avram Yitzchak and Yaakov. Why do Dafka, especially, we know so little about Ephraim and Menashe. They don't get a lot of ink in the Torah. We know very, very little about them. We know a lot more about Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. We know their life stories. We know their trials and tribulations. We know their nisyanas. We know how they passed their nisyanas. That would seemingly be a much more powerful blessing to our children, to our sons. Yisimcha Elokim ka Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. But no, by our sons, we leave out the avos, and we specifically, even though we know so little about Ephraim and Menashe, for thousands of years, this is how we bless our sons. Yisimcha Elokim ka Ephraim and Menashe. Why? What's unique about Ephraim and Menashe? Okay. So I want to share with you, and this year is a little bit different than other shiur, because usually what I do is I take one sort of, one mahalach, one thought, and explain it across the board. But here I want to share with you different thoughts from different commentaries about, oh, you're trying to kill that little. Different thoughts about, maybe a Gilgul and a Neshama that has to hear Torah. Don't be so quick to swat it. Maybe after the shiur. So I want to share with you different ideas from different opinions, across the spectrum of commentaries. Why Ephraim and Menashe, and some of the questions that are surrounding, just to give us some insights into this episode from different perspectives. But it's also really from each perspective, there's so much that we can learn, or at least from several of them, there's so much that really are applicable to us today, and we could learn for us today. So two of the most commonly given answers to this question as to why specifically we bless our children, Yisimcha Elokim Ephraim and Menashe, are our sons at least, that they should be like Ephraim and Menashe. So two of the most common answers that I've seen is, one answer is that Ephraim and Menashe grew up in Galus. They grew up without an infrastructure of Judaism. Everybody else up until this time, Yitzchak grew up in the house of Avram and Sarah. Yaakov grew up in the house of Yitzchak and Rivka. The Shvatim grew up, and Yosef grew up, at least until he's 17, in the house of Yaakov. So everyone up to this point grew up with some type of Jewish infrastructure, of family, of guidance, of being around a support system of Judaism. Whereas Ephraim and Menashe were the first Jewish children to grow up in exile, to grow up in Mitzrayim, without any Jewish infrastructure at all. There's no kosher food. There's no yeshivas. There's nothing. There's no family. There's no Bubby and Zadie. There's no first cousins. There's no spiritual or even physical support whatsoever for Judaism. And yet, one of the things we know about Ephraim and Menashe is, like Yosef, they were righteous. They held on to their morals and their values. And so this is why we tell our children there's this unique strength in Ephraim and Menashe that we don't see up to this point, that without any infrastructure at all, they were completely not influenced by the values and by the value system around them. And remember where they are. They are in Mitzrayim, Egypt, which is at that point Erves Haaretz. This is a country filled with immorality, filled with indecency, filled with violence, filled with paganism, filled with idolatry, filled with licentiousness, erves haaretz, and yet they weren't influenced a iota, a kiyuv zed, they weren't influenced. They were so strong, their values that they were raised with, alone, without any infrastructure at all, and any extended family, had so permeated their psyche that they were able to retain their connection to Judaism with zero infrastructure. This shows an incredible spiritual strength that both Ephraim and Menashe had. And hence we bless our children. Yasim Chalukim Ephraim and Menashe, that even if you find yourself in an environment that is the antithetical to Judaism and antithetical to our values, but like Ephraim and Menashe, you should be permeated with our values. You should know our values. You should be so connected to our values that any outside influence should not permeate your psyche to affect and to bring any kind of spiritual descent or eureka whatsoever. That's one answer given why we bless our children like Ephraim and Menashe. Another answer given is the relationship between the two. That even though Ephraim was given the right hand by Yaakov, exactly what Yosef is worried about, right? When Yaakov does this, Yosef immediately corrects his father. Dad, you're doing it again. You're showing favoritism again. And remember what happened the first time this happened. It ended up in Yosef suffering and being exiled into Mitzrayim and sold into slavery and all kinds of pain for Yosef. And here Yosef sees Yaakov's repeating the behavior by giving Ephraim the right hand. And yet, notwithstanding this, we see that Menashe and Ephraim are love each other and are bonded, are connected, and there's no division or divisiveness between them. They both serve their father in different roles and seemingly in complete and total harmony. And so here, the harmony in the family, what a powerful blessing that we bless our children with. And really, we're blessing our children, but as we're blessing our children, we ourselves are understanding what we're saying. Yisim Chalukim Ephraim and Menashe. That having harmony in the family is so important. Not just important spiritually, which it is, but even physically to Klal Yisrael, our strength, our physical strength as a nation is very connected, interconnected with our strength, the strength of our families, the psychological, the emotional strength of our families. You know, it's fascinating because when we make the census, much later on, when we in the Torah, when we count the census, when the Hashem commands them to count the census, and they're counting the Jewish men who are available to fight in the army, so the Jews know how strong and how large their army is. The Torah tells us to count them l'mishpachesam l'beis avesam. They're counted based upon their families. The Torah tells us l'mishpachesam l'beis avesam. Over and over again, it repeats that the census is counted based upon counting families. In other words, what the Torah is telling us by constantly repeating that the count for the army, which represents our physical strength, is l'mishpachesam l'beis avesam. Is very much, our physical strength is very much dependent upon the strength of l'mishpachesam l'beis avesam, the strength of our families, the strength of our homes. And so this is what we're blessing our children, Yisim Chalukim Ephraim and Menashe, that there should be harmony between them, notwithstanding that one may get more than the other, that their circumstances may be different. These are all the types of things that cause sort of inherent jealousy. One child gets a little bit more attention from the parents, or one child is a little bit more successful, or one child has a little bit more different attributes, or whatever it may be. And there's often kina, jealousy, and resentment. And so this is what we are blessing our children with, harmony. It adds strength to them. It gives them strength, but it also gives Klal Yisrael strength when there's harmony in our families. And I'm sure it says this somewhere. I don't remember where I saw this. I must have seen this somewhere. I'm not smart enough to make this up on my own. But if you take a look throughout Sefer Bereshis, at the relationships, at the sibling relationships throughout Sefer Bereshis, from Bereshis to Vayechi, the entire Sefer, just take a look at the sort of trajectory of sibling relationships, right? Let's start. The very first sibling relationship is Cain and Hevel, right? It ends in murder. They so don't get on. There's such jealousy. There's such kina. There's such differences between them that it ends in the murder of one brother to another. Fratricide. The worst thing it could be. And then move on when we start getting into the families of family of the Jewish people, right? But then we have Yitzchak and Yishmael. It doesn't end up in murder, but they have such tension and such difficulty getting along that literally they have to separate forever. That Yishmael is banished and they can never come back together again. And they never do come back together again. There's a remez that Yishmael does tshuva by Avram's burial. He allows Yitzchak to go first, but clearly in the Torah, they never come back together again, at least physically, and live together again. Or even make up. We don't even see that they make up at all. And then go to the next generation, where you have Yaakov and Esau. They also do not get along. They also separate, but they come back together and reconcile. They're able to come back together and reconcile. So again, there's a trajectory here. The first one ends in murder. The second one ends in permanent separation. The next generation, they come back together, they reconcile, but they can't live together. Esau and Yaakov don't live together. They go their separate ways, but at least they're reconciled. Then go to the next generation, the Shvatim. They also, and Yosef, they also have difficulties getting along. They also separate, but they reconcile and live together in harmony the last 17 years. So now we get to a point where the brothers are able to come together and stay together in harmony. And then the final generation of brothers in Sefer Bereshis is Ephraim and Menashe, where they're able to live together. There's no division, and they're in harmony together for their entire lives. It's literally in every generation, there's a trajectory upwards where we see obviously there's a powerful lesson there. This is the growth and the development. And we actually do not become a nation until the Ephraim and Menashe experience. Now that the two brothers can live together permanently and in harmony without any division, without any machlokes at all, now we could start Am Yisrael, which is Sefer Shmos. So again, I don't think I made that up. It's obvious that it's there. I'm sure I must have heard this somewhere, but we can see the clear trajectory in the difficult sibling relationships. And this is a powerful lesson for us as well, because many of us that have sibling relationships also have complicated sibling relationships. And oftentimes, because of various circumstances, those relationships are complicated and difficult and fraught with different emotions. And I'm trying to get her image, something. So there's nothing I can do on my end. Something on her end. Oh, okay. So anyway, so that's another answer given why we bench our children, Ephraim and Menashe, the harmony between the two. Just as a third, a quick answer. I saw this in the Eish Tamid, which Shani just bought me a whole bunch of Sforim from Eretz Yisrael, that he quotes in the name of his father. That you see an interesting thing by Ephraim and Menashe, that in general there's a concept called Yuridis Haderis, that every generation sort of becomes lower spiritually. And you see this, for example, the Avos. The Gemara says the Avos are only Shleisha. The Shvatim, as great as tzaddikim as they are, Yehuda, Reuven, Shimon, Levi, but they're not a part of our Avos, right? The Avos are only three because there's the Yuridis Haderis after the Avos. And every generation sort of gets lower. But there's one unique thing about Ephraim and Menashe. And this is, again, from Rav Druk's father, who says, he quotes his father, and he says, Ephraim and Menashe, when Yaakov blesses them, he says, Keruven v'Shimon Yuli. They are like Reuven and Shimon to me, which means they have no Yuridis Haderis. They are like the door, this is what Yaakov is saying. They're like Reuven and Shimon. They're the generation above them. They're like the generation above them, says Yaakov. They have no Yuridis Haderis. And so this is Rav Druk's father. This is why we bless our children to Ephraim and Menashe. We're blessing our children that they should not experience Yuridis Haderis. Okay, just another answer. Okay. I want to move on now. Again, the same topic, but I want to move to the answer of the Kedusha slave. The Kedushas Levi, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev, gives such a beautiful explanation of the bracha of Ephraim and Menashe, and it is so. As soon as I learned, I had learned it previously, but I reviewed it again now in preparation for this year, and it's just from all of the answers, this one I think is the most, at least for me, the most comforting for today. So he says as follows, says the Kedushas Levi as follows, and he gives a little bit of a preface in order to understand why he's asking the question, why does it say after the bracha Yisim Cholakim Ephraim Menashe the Yasim Ephraim with Menashe? Why does the possuk add that Yaakov? That's his question on this whole on the bracha of Yaakov to Ephraim and Menashe. Why does it end? Why does the possuk end that Yaakov placed Ephraim from Menashe? When that's obvious, it's in the blessing itself. We don't need the possuk to tell us that. The Yasim Ephraim with Menashe. So says the Kedushas Levi as follows, and he quotes a very cryptic Gemara, quotes a cryptic Talmud in Masechtas Megillah. And Masechtas Megillah, the Talmud says as follows, that the midah of basar v'dam ain't midah basar v'dam kamidas HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That human beings are obviously differentiated from Hashem in many ways. And the Gemara says one way is that when a human being wants to cook water, wants to boil water on the pot or cook water, first the person has to put the pot down on the stove and then fill the pot with water. Masha'ain Cain says the Gemara, this is not the case with Hashem. First, Hashem creates the water, meaning the rains in the rains in the heavens, and then He creates the heavens, the vessel to hold the water. First, Hashem creates the water, and then He puts the vessel there. Whereas human beings first put the vessel there and then the water. And that's the end of the Gemara. Very cryptic. What exactly is the Gemara saying? What water is Hashem? What is the Gemara talking about that Hashem places there first? The commentaries say the water's in the sky, the rain, but obviously, like many of these non-halachic Gemaras, the Agadatas, they're written in code and they're written cryptically and mystically, and they're meant, and this obviously is written that way. What exactly is it referring to? And so the Kedushas Levi says as follows. He quotes a possuk in the end of Parshas B'Shalach. And the possuk in the end of Parshas B'Shalach says, Kol ha'machla asher samti b'Mitzrayim le'asim alecha, ki ani Hashem rifecha. That all the disease and all the illness that I placed in Mitzrayim, that the Egyptians were cursed with all of the plagues and illness that are, I will not place upon you, the Jewish people, because I am Hashem, your healer. That's the possuk in B'Shalach. It's a strange possuk. What exactly does it mean? Because the possuk seems, if you take it at face value, that Jews won't get sick. But we see Jews do get sick. We do have disease. So what exactly does that possuk mean? So he says the explanation of the possuk is not that we won't get sick, but he says the reason why that will be different. It's not the fact that Mitzrayim get sick, Jews get sick, we all get sick, part of the human condition. But the question is, why do we experience the illness? And that's what the possuk is saying. The reason why I placed that illness on Mitzrayim was to punish them, was to afflict them for their evil, for their negativity, for their enslaving and their involvement in the enslavement of Klal Yisrael, and for their torment of Klal Yisrael. So I placed illness in Mitzrayim to afflict them and to punish them. But that is not why I will place illness to Klal Yisrael. In other words, Klal Yisrael will also experience illness and disease, but for a completely different reason. And so the Kedushas Levi explains. He says, everything that comes from Hashem, we have to understand that Ein Ra Yer L'Mayla. So that ultimately, everything that comes from Hashem is part of a bigger bracha. But we obviously don't always feel that. We oftentimes feel the pain and feel the difficulty that we experience. And so says the Kedushas Levi, The disease that we experience, the illnesses that we experience, the pain that we experience, the sorrows that Klal Yisrael experiences is not for the sake of affliction and not for the sake of punishment. It's to the contrary, it's for the sake of bracha. And he explains that oftentimes Hashem wants to be mashpia, wants to bring down, whether to us individually or to our nation collectively, tremendous brachas. But the problem is that we don't have a keli to fit that bracha. The bracha is larger than our current vessel to receive it is. Again, if this could be individually or it could be collectively. So what happens? So what happens is the smaller vessel has to be shattered in order to create space to create a larger vessel. So for example, we see this in kashrus. You know, when a kli cheres gets treifed, the only way that it can't be koshered, the only way that it can become koshered is if the vessel is completely broken and totally reformed into a new vessel. Put back into the kiln and completely reformed. So he says, similarly, oftentimes, says the Kedushas Levi, HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants to bless us with a powerful bracha. Again, individually or collectively, or could apply to both or either. But the current keli is too small. So the current keli has to be shattered. And oftentimes the shattering of that current keli, of that current vessel, is a painful experience that we have to go through. Illness, disease, whatever it may be, nisyanis, trials, whatever it may be. But the entire point, this is what the possuk is saying. The disease that I afflicted Mitzrayim with for the sake of affliction, that is not why I give disease to you, to Klal Yisrael. I bring healing to you. And so by Hashem, it's hiktim refuah lamaka. That initially the chesed comes first, the baracha comes, it's there, but we don't have a vessel for it. So therefore, Hashem has to coordinate things and organize things and be masader things to shatter our current vessel, which is a painful experience, a difficult experience. And when we're going through it, we can't understand why or how, and nothing makes any sense. But the entire point of it, which we often see after in hindsight, we only see looking backwards. We're able to see the entire point of the shattering of the vessel was to create a much larger vessel to receive the bracha that was already there. That's why I bring it, and that's what the Gemara is talking about. That Hashem first places the water. Mayim is like a mayim. Mayim represents chesed. Because it causes things to grow, it causes things to flourish. Mayim is bracha. So when a human being first has to create the vessel, and only then can bring the water. But Hashem, this is what the Gemara Masechta Megillah is saying. But Hashem brings the water first. But the bracha is there. Hiktim refuah lamaka. The bracha is there initially, but we don't have a keli for it. We don't have a vessel for it. So Hashem has to shatter the vessel and then create a larger vessel. So Hashem brings the water first and then the vessel. That's what the Gemara Masechta Megillah is talking about. And this, now with this understanding, let's bring it back to our Parsha. Says the Kedushas Levi. It's a beautiful Kedushas Levi. He says, Menashe and Ephraim. Look at the two names. And when Yaakov named them, Menashe, the firstborn son, Menashe was named Kineshani Elokim Kol Moli V'Kol Beisavi. Hashem helped me forget. Menashe means to forget. Hashem helped me forget all of the pain, all of the difficulties in my father's home. Menashe represents the pain, the difficulties, the broken vessel, so to speak. Ephraim, the next born son, when Yaakov names him, Ki Ephrani Elokim, Hashem made me fruitful. Hashem blessed me in Be'eretz Aniyah, in the land of my impoverishment, in Mitzrayim. So when Yosef names Ephraim, he names him after blessing. Menashe is named after pain. They represent the two elements of this cycle: the shattering of the vessel, the Menashe, or the painful experience, and Ephraim, the bracha. And so Yaakov places his right hand on Ephraim to teach everybody, Yosef and all of Klal Yisrael, that the ikr, the main, the most important part is Ephraim, the bracha that comes afterwards. That's what gets the right hand. That's the main thing. That's the ikr. That's the principle. So Yedayte b'ni Yedayte, yes, Menashe is important. The shattering of the vessel is important. But we always have to remember, the Hashem places Ephraim before Menashe. Hashem gives the bracha before the pain. The water is there before the vessel. And so when the possuk says, V'yasim Ephraim l'fnei Menashe, we often read it. See, we read the verse as Yaakov is saying, Yisimcha Elokim k'Ephraim u'k'Menashe, period, end of Yaakov's sentence. And then the possuk is narrating, V'yasim Ephraim l'fnei Menashe. And so we ask the question, why does the possuk have to narrate that? Says the Kedush Levi, that's not how to read it. V'yasim Ephraim l'fnei Menashe is part of Yaakov's bracha, says Kedush Levi. That's part of Yaakov's words. He's telling Yosef and he's telling Klal Yisrael. We should always remember V'yasim Ephraim l'fnei Menashe. That the reason why I'm putting my right hand on Ephraim is that Hashem always places the blessing before the shattering of the vessel. Hashem always places the Ephraim before the Menashe. This is Yaakov saying those words. Yaakov's explaining why he's placing his right hand there. And so we have to recognize, says the Kedushas Levi, when we are going through tsaros, when we are going through difficulties, we're going through the Menashe experience, but we have to realize and remember the Ephraim, V'yasim Ephraim l'fnei Menashe, that Ephraim's always there first, that the bracha is there waiting. We're just experiencing the creation of a new keli, but that the bracha is there, waiting for the new keli to be built. Oh, what a beautiful Kedushas Levi, and how applicable is that to our time? Mirza Hashem, we should see the bracha. We should experience the larger keli already and see the bracha, b'teva nirva nigla. Okay, let me share one more. Although we could end on that Kedushas Levi, because that Kedushas Levi is so beautiful, and that's why we give our children the blessing of Ephraim and Menashe. What a powerful idea! We are empowering our children by telling them, yes, life is going to be difficult, and you may experience pain, and you may experience difficulties, and you may experiencing the shattering of the vessel, but you should always remember, Yisimcha Elokim k'Ephraim and Menashe, that when Yaakov blessed them, he placed his right hand on Ephraim and taught us the Yasim Ephraim l'fnei Menashe, that even though you're experiencing pain and you may experience difficulties and you may experience nisyanis, you should always remember the Ephraim, the bracha, that's a sign that the bracha is already there. What a way to empower our children. And so what a message for our children. That's why we bless with Ephraim and Menashe, says the Kedushas Levi. What a beautiful Kedushas Levi. Okay. Let me share one more idea. I actually have two more, but I'm going to run out of time. So let me do one more. One more. And this is from Rabbi Ephraim Tversky in the Sari Alafim, who I quote often, who I just love his sefer. It just resonates with me. And he gives a completely different, we have to change gears, a completely different symbolism of Ephraim and Menashe. And he says like this. He asks a separate question. Kedushas Levi asked the question on V'yasim Ephraim l'fnei Menashe. Why does the possuk end? Why does it repeat that? It's obvious. He asks a separate question. If Yaakov wants to change his hands, why doesn't Yaakov just rearrange the way they're standing instead of changing his hands? If Yaakov feels that Ephraim gets the right hand, says, sorry, I love him. Well, I mean, it's not only his question. Many of them, of course, ask this. Why doesn't Yaakov just change their positions and then put his hands on them straight? It's a great question. Yaakov doesn't do that. Instead, Sikolas Yada, he guides his hands. So says the Sari Lafim as follows, a different symbolism of Ephraim and Menashe, but also such a powerful lesson to our children. And this one, a powerful lesson to us and to our educators. And I love this answer also. Different symbolism about what Ephraim and Menashe represent. He says Menashe is the Bechor. The Bechor was always, up until Cheta Egel, the Bechor was the spiritual leader. The Bechor was the representative of the tzaddik, the spiritual righteous guides, the spiritual guides to Klal Yisrael. That was their position. That was the Kohanim that serve in the basement. They were meant to be the Bechorim. So the Bechorim were meant to be the spiritual leaders and guides and tzaddikim and righteous, our righteous leaders of our nation, the Bechorim. So that's Menashe. He says Menashe represents the tzaddik Jew. Ephraim represents the Jew who wanders, the Jew who struggles, the Jew who leaves the path and maybe wanders back. And he says, if you look throughout Tanakh, many of the descendants of the righteous Ephraim were actually, he had many descendants who were Rishoyim, who left the path of Judaism. Ephraim ben Nevat was one of them. One famous one, who this is in the times of the first Beis Hamikdash, became the king in the divided kingdom and set up idolatry along the road to the Beis Hamikdash and wouldn't let Jews go to the Beis Hamikdash and compelled Jews to worship idols. One of the descendants of Ephraim. So he says Ephraim represents the Baal Tshuva or the wandering Jew, and Menashe represents the tzaddik. And he says, and he brings a fascinating medrash. And I had never actually had seen this medrash or noticed this medrash until I saw it quoted by him. That when Yaakov says Yedaiti b'ni Yedaiti, right? Obviously, there's symbolism in there. When Yosef corrects him, when he siklas Yadav, and he says he's his father, no, don't show favoritism. And Yaakov answers, no, I know what I'm doing. Yedaiti b'ni Yedaiti. Says the medrash. What is Yaakov saying? I know what. What does he know? Says the medrash. Yedaiti, I know the story about Ruvain and Bilhah. Yedaiti, I know the story of Yehuda and Tamar. I know what happened there. Yedaiti, in another medrash, he quotes says, I know what the Shvatim did to you. That's what he says, Yedaiti b'ni Yedaiti, when Yaakov tries to correct his hands. So the Sari Elafim asks, what does any of that have to do with the topic at hand? Why is now the point where Yaakov's telling Yosef, I know what happened with Reuben and Bilhah. I know what happened with Yehuda and Tamar. I know what happened with you and your brothers and you. In other words, where there have been failures in my children, where there have been moral or spiritual transgressions, Yedaiti, I'm aware of them. But what does that have to do with the moment? So that's nice and fine. Yes, Yaakov is Ruach HaKodesh, and he's aware of these negative events that happen with his children. But what does that have to do with the bracha of Ephraim and Menashe? Why does the Medrash say, bring that here, that's what Yaakov's responding to Yosef? And he gives a beautiful answer. And he says as follows. He says that throughout the generations, Yaakov is blessing Menashe and Ephraim. It's not just blessing. This is a blessing, obviously, that is going to resonate, which it does, Adayim Azeh, resonate throughout the generations. And throughout the generations, Klal Yisrael will be made up of the Jews who stay loyal to the path, the Menashe Jews. And then we have the Ephraim Jews, the Jews who leave the path for whatever reason, leave the path of Yiddishkeit, and some of them come back and some of them don't come back. But he says, so what Yaakov is doing is explaining to his son. It's not that he's showing favoritism. What he's showing is that the Ephraim Jews need and will be empowered by the right hand of Yaakov. The right hand is Yamin Mekarevis. The right side represents chesed. It represents love. It represents bringing them close. As the possuk says, Yamin Mekarevis is a small deicha. The right hand brings close and the left hand pushes away. The right side is chesed and kabbalah. The left side is gevurah. Yaakov is giving Ephraim the right hand, and by extension, the Ephraim Jews throughout our history are receiving the right hand of Yaakov. And this is what Yaakov is telling Yosef. He's telling Yosef, you see, you don't have experience with Bali Tshuva, Yosef. You have two sons who are tzaddikim, who never left the path. But Yedaiti b'ni Yedaiti, I have experience with Bali Tshuva. I know about Ruvain and Bilhah. I know the mistakes that Ruvain made. I know the mistake that Yehuda made. I know the mistakes that the Shvatim made. And the only response to the Jews who leave the path is the Yamin Mekarevis, is the right hand. It's to show them love, to show them kiruv, to show them closeness, to bring them close, and that will empower them to bring them back. They need the right hand. And not only that, but what does Yaakov respond? That this one Menashe will be greater, your tzaddikim are great. They're wonderful, they're great. But the Bali Tshuva will be even greater. But makom shabali tshuva aimdin, Afilu tzadikim gemurim ena yechelim la'amli, says the Talmud. That in the place where the Baal Tshuva stands, what the Baal Tshuva experiences, somebody who has left Judaism and becomes back, does tshuva, stands in a place and has stature in a Kadosh Baruch Hu's eyes that even the greatest tzaddik doesn't have. And that's exactly what Yaakov says. I'm giving him the right hand because, yes, Menashe will be great. The Menashe Jews are important. They're an important part of our nation. But the Ephraim Jews will be even greater. And they get the right hand because it's the Yamin Mikarev. What a beautiful, and maybe that's why we teach our children. That's why we bless our children, Ephraim and Menashe, that they should remember that when they come across a Jew who is struggling, and by the way, it's not only the Ephraim Jews out there, it's the Ephraim Jew in here that we have to have compassion to. Our own. We all have a part of ourselves that are the Menashe and the Ephraim. We all have our tzaddik parts, and we all have our parts in areas where we struggle. And the lesson is, don't beat yourself up. Have compassion over the Ephraim Jew within yourself. And maybe that's the message that we're giving our children. What a beautiful response. Would every mechanech, would every teacher, would every principal learn the Sari Alaf? That the response to those who are struggling and those who are leaving the derech isn't to push them away, isn't to denigrate them, isn't to make them feel worse, but to the contrary, it's to give them the right hand. They get Yaakov's right hand because the Yaakov is teaching Yosef, and that's the Yadaiti b'ni Yadaiti, Ruvain and Yehuda and the Shvatim. I know how to deal with Bali Tshuva, says Yaakov. I have experience with this, and the one answer is Yamin Mekaretz, the right hand. So, what a powerful lesson for all of us, and what a powerful lesson for our children. And so, these are just different, again, 5 different explanations of the blessings, why we give our children, and the psukim around the blessings of Ephraim and Menashe, but especially the last 2, how relevant and how important are they for us today? So Amir Hashem, we like the Kedushas Levi, we're all going through the collective Menashe right now, the collective breaking of the vessel, and Amir Hashem, we will be zeicha to experience the mayim, experience the water, experience the baracha with the larger vessel that we've all made through our extra Torah and through our extra tefillah and through our extra achdus that we've all put into the world. And clearly we have put that into the world. So we've clearly made the bigger vessel. So as the Kedushas Levi says, once we make the bigger vessel, then Hashem will shower us with bracha, will pour the water into the vessel. May we see that water, b'teva nir v'nigla, and perhaps the one last element that's remaining to create that vessel is what the Sari Alafim says, that let's extend our Yamin Mekareves to those who are wandering. Let's give them the right hand of Yaakov and bring them back into the family of Klal Yisrael. And maybe that will be the final step in creating the vessel so that we will all receive the Baracha, L'mayla Mederach HaTeva, with Nisim B'Nefleis, and the greatest miracle, the coming of Mashiach Tzidkenu, B'Imheir B'Yimenu, Amen. So let's just conclude with Tehillim, and for our brothers and sisters in Eretz Yisrael and wherever they may be all over the world. Let's do, what do we do? Tehillim 121, right? Yeah, let's just do Tehillim 121, and we'll conclude the shiur. Okay. Here we go. Shir Lamaloi Seseinai Harimiyayin Yaboy Ezri Mi Madinai Oise Shemayim Vioretz Ayitin Lamay Raglecha Ayanim Shemrecha Hine Layanim Vlayishan Shemi Yisrael Adinoi Shemrecha Adonai Tzilcha Ayad Yaminecha Yema Mashamish Layakacha Biareach Balayla Adinoi Yishmarcha Mikora Yishmares Nafshecha Adonai Yishmer Tzeisko V'yecho Mi'ata V'yadei. Have a wonderful week, everybody, and we'll see everybody Mirza Hashem next week for Parshas. Take care. Have a wonderful week.